And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Awesome. I've had to pee for like 10 minutes.
This podcast of Bourbon Pursuit is in partnership with the WhiskeyWash.com, a lifestyle website for news and reviews for people who like whiskey, and for those who think a life without whiskey has no style. The WhiskeyWash.com. And welcome back to an episode of the Bourbon Pursuit Podcast. My name is Kenny, and we actually have a melting meld of minds over here, right? We've got a lot of good knowledge to share. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, a lot more knowledge than we have. I mean, a lot of respectable people in the bourbon industry here, so I'm really excited. We've had a great conversation thus far, and I'm excited for our guests to tune in on it.
Yeah, so I guess let's go ahead and introduce our guest tonight, because we don't really want to slow this up with any kind of like bullshit intros, right? So let's start it off. So today we have Maggie Kimberl, we have
Hello.
Nino Marchetti, and we have the Veach. We have the
Veach.
famous Michael Veach on the podcast tonight. So Michael, welcome, because you're a first timer here.
My first time on your podcast.
There you go.
It's only taken, a year or so, just harassing and hounding you to get on.
We'll get you on. So tonight we are at a Whiskey Wash dinner. We had to want to get everybody together, kind of just talk about other things we've been doing, the fun, the bourbon.
We're at the fabulous Down One Bourbon Bar, we should mention, in the speakeasy room.
Yeah,
we just all drank copious amounts of bourbon, so everything you hear tonight is
NSFW.
And baby, gonna be fun.
And we had tons of pork, so...
But even with that, so we're at Down One, and Down One has they have their own Maker's 46 blend, and it was actually Michael that said, like, you guys need to try these. And what do you want to pair them with? Go ahead and just kind of talk about like your bourbon and food pairings.
They're dates, bacon wrapped dates with
their Maker's house barrel, and we don't say blend. By the by,
yes.
I don't know how you
It's a
made
marriage.
it. Yeah, it's
a marriage.
We batch or we mingle.
Right.
Technically, blue cheese stuffed dates wrapped in bacon with bourbon maple syrup for $8.99.
And we had 2 orders, and we.
I highly recommend get some of their single barrel Maker's 46, their house select with the dates, and try them together.
It's amazing.
They're good.
It's a match made in heaven.
I once did a bourbon tasting where it was a charity tasting. I went to this woman's house and did the tasting, and she had this wonderful fruit tray set out there. And she picked up, we were comparing the bourbons with different fruits and things like that. And I tried a Old Forester signature with a very fresh peach.
Ooh.
And I said, oh, this is really good. So she picks up a piece of peach and takes a bite and takes a sip of the Old Forester, and she looks at me and she goes, that's orgasmic. So her husband looks at me and says, I'm going out and buying a case of peaches and a bottle of Old Forester.
Better than Viagra.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So
The dates are almost as good as the peach.
I would say so.
They
I
are
would
awesome.
say
I think
so.
we had 2 or 3 orders of those.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
So I guess since you do a lot of bourbon tastings, and you're able to kind of, and this is actually something we talked about beforehand. So you said that Makers in the 46 kind of marriage, you said it's like one of the most unique things that you've ever been a part of. Kind of talk about that just a little bit, because...
Oh, the Maker 46 barrel selection is a very unique experience, something that I've never experienced before in the barrel selection process, and I've done a lot of them. It has taken it to a new level.
Hold on, before you go any farther, how many barrel selections have you done in your life? Like, do you keep like a chalkboard on your wall?
I couldn't tell you. I am on Party Mart's bourbon board of directors, so I do.
I'd say it's in the high dozens.
He's actually done enough that he's actually built a house out of bourbon barrels.
I would say it's probably close to 150 bourbon barrel selections.
Yeah.
So talk us a little bit through the Maker selection. I mean, don't go in depth, right? Because we talked about it before.
What
but
makes it
1,001 combinations, didn't Jane say?
Yeah. Well, and actually, John Schuscher came up to me afterwards. He goes, they're not doing their math right, because, they have 5 different woods and you got 10 different staves. So it's actually, like 5 to the 10th power. So it's more than 1,001 selections that you could do.
Thank you so much, John Schuscher.
Yeah. But What it is, you have 10 staves that gets put into the barrel, and they got 5 different woods. And you get to pick any combination that you want to do. So, if you wanted to, you could make it all 10 staves, one type, or you could make 2 of each, or however many combinations in between you want to do. Mm-hmm. And it's all based upon the different flavor aspects that these different types of staves bring to the whiskey.
So which one did you pick?
I got outvoted both times I'd done it.
We should mention the Bourbon Board of Directors is you, Carla Carlton, and Susan Riegler.
Right. So I was outnumbered 3-1 by the women. The selection that we ended up making for Party Mart was 5 of the French Mocha staves with 3 of the 49 Maker's 49 barrel
46.
staves, with 1 of the French Curvy and 1 of the French Spicy Oak.
Sounds like a fancy coffee drink.
Yeah. It was. It was a really fabulous barrel. We tried it last night.
Yes, and it was very good. I personally, if I ever get a chance to go back and do this again, which I probably will next year with Party Mart, I want to try one that's like 6 of the French Mocha and 4 of the American Oak, because the American Oak's very caramelly and vanilla and butterscotch and mocha and caramel.
Sounds like macchiato.
Well, what I'm thinking is, the Baby Ruth candy bar in a bottle.
Maggie, you had a really interesting story you were talking about, because if anybody's out there, the word Pappy automatically, you get
perks
blood.
The ears up.
Oh,
absolutely.
The hair stand up, everything like that. And you had an opportunity to go and deal with the whole Pappy cigar.
Yeah, that was
thing.
So that was really interesting. One of the things we were talking about earlier is, Pappy & Co. is the merchandise wing of the Old Rip Van Winkle company. And, I fault them not at all for coming up with that extra revenue stream. I think it's genius, because there are a lot of people out there making a lot more money on their whiskey than they are.
Trying to make money off of it.
But yeah, one of the products that they're selling is a Pappy Van Winkle barrel fermented cigar. So this is unlike anything anybody else is doing. It's made by Drew Estate in Nicaragua. But what he's doing is he's taking Kentucky seed, Kentucky grown tobacco, dark air curing it in Kentucky, and then barn smoking it in Kentucky. He then takes that tobacco, ships it down to St. James Parish in New Orleans. They cram 500 pounds of tobacco into a used Pappy barrel, put the screw presses on it, and it starts a fermentation process. And it changes the chemical makeup of these leaves. It actually barrel ferments the leaves.
So what's the angel's share to that?
That I couldn't answer. I don't know. I didn't get quite that technical, although maybe next time. Then they ship those barrels down to Nicaragua, and they take that tobacco and they roll it into cigars. So this is not a whiskey flavored cigar. This is not a barrel aged cigar. This is a cigar where the tobacco has undergone the Perique process of fermentation, but it's not Perique tobacco. It's Kentucky tobacco that's been dark air cured and fire cured. So it's unlike anything anybody else is doing, and it's not meant to pair with a whiskey necessarily, although you certainly could. It's meant to stand on its own, and it's meant to be a very high-end cigar, because Pappy Van Winkle was known for loving his well-made bourbon and his well-made cigars, and so this is definitely.
Yeah, you see him on the bottle huffing a big stogie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's where the whole idea of Pappy Van Winkle came from, was that picture of him smoking a cigar.
So, with this whole Pappy craze, I mean, we've already seen that there's been counterfeit Pappy bottles. How long do you think it's going to be until you see counterfeit Pappy cigars to go along with it?
Counterfeit cigars have always been a problem.
Oh, I know people that they're huge Cohiba fans.
Right.
And I've got a friend, and he, every single time somebody says oh, is this a real Cohiba? And they'll send him a picture to it, and he goes, "Dude, you just got scammed bad."
Yeah, and that's always been a big problem. I'm not aware of any such issues like that as of yet, but it is such an interesting and different product. It would be hard to counterfeit at this point. I would imagine somewhere down the line that's going to be a problem, though. You're right.
Oh, I think with any industry, it's going to be a problem, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we're noticing in the bourbon boom, there's counterfeit everywhere.
Right.
You can get it pretty much anywhere you want, right?
Well, and that's one of the things we were talking about earlier with, disposing your bottles properly. That's so important right now. And places like Rewicked Candle Company are doing things, legitimate reuse things that are taking those bottles off of the market, off of the secondary market, so they can't be refilled and sold as counterfeit.
Yeah, and I think, so if anybody doesn't know, you can listen to Chad on a past episode of ours, but that kind of goes into something that Nino even saw today. So Nino, kind of talk about what you saw today, because you were traveling around Kentucky, because you're actually here from Portland, right? You're kind of experiencing the Bourbon Trail, experiencing everything that's here. You're taking in a little bit of downtown Louisville life, but you got to see something that was kind of like, you almost kind of get taken back by it a little bit, right?
So I was in a city near the Buffalo Trace Distillery in a certain liquor store, and I don't want to name them just not to get them in trouble, but looking around the liquor store, I saw a group of empty bottles for sale, including a Pappy Van Winkle 20-year-old for about $60 a bottle, and I was a little floored by that. You don't normally see empty whiskey bottles like that for sale in liquor stores, maybe more on eBay, but to actually see that there was a little
And for an extra
shocking.
$30, we'll sell you whiskey to refill them and then sell it on to.
Nobody will ever know.
Yeah, exactly.
Most definitely. But I mean, my time here this week has been spent checking out distilleries, hanging out with folks at those distilleries, and just learning all there is to learn about the history. And God knows there's a lot of history here in Kentucky.
And good thing we have a historian with us tonight.
Yeah,
Most
some of it
definitely,
true.
yes.
Some of it true, mostly false.
Yes. I got a chance, like I said, to walk around Buffalo Trace today with Fred. He is a great tour guide there. Did basically the equivalent of an extended version of the Hard Hat Tour. And got to see a lot of the behind-the-scenes things and just poke my head in a lot of these older Buffalo Trace buildings.
So I guess that's probably a good way to bring Michael back into this. So let's talk about a little bit the history of the Buffalo Trace Distillery, right? Because I mean, you can Wikipedia in it, but the Buffalo Trace Distillery has held many names over the years. It's been the George T. Staggs Distillery. It's been all kinds of things.
I mean, yeah.
So kind of give everybody kind of a rundown of what the past of where it really began and to kind of what it is today of what Buffalo Trace is.
Well, that is kind of funny, because when Maggie was telling the story about Pappy Van Winkle and the cigars, I was thinking, E.H. Taylor used to buy his Cuban cigars every year. Colonel Taylor, who was colonel only in the Kentucky colonel fashion, he never served in the military.
Right. We have to make that distinction. We
Yes.
forget everybody's not from Kentucky.
Right. But he founded the OFC, the Old Fashioned Copper Distillery, in 1870. He had bought the distillery from actually a relative of his wife. He immediately started turning it into a place to where visitors could come and tour the distillery. He had the idea that a distillery should be a place to where people could come and see how their whiskey was made. And it should be a place of pristine cleanliness and attractiveness.
And he was really revolutionary in that
Yeah,
idea.
and he really is the father of bourbon tourism. Unfortunately, he lost control of the distillery at the end of the 1870s. He goes on to found the Old Taylor Distillery, and he builds it, once again, with tourists in mind, and builds it as a castle. Now the Castle and Key Distillery. Taylor was a person who believed in quality over quantity. And that's where he fell out with the new owners in the 1880s, the firm of Gregory and Stagg, who bailed him out of some financial trouble at the end of the 1870s in return for control of the old OFC distillery. They believed in quantity over quality as long as they could make money at it.
Can we back up a little bit to those financial troubles he was having? I was told today that had to do with his lobbying efforts to keep Frankfort the capital of Kentucky.
Oh no, that wasn't until several years
Okay.
later.
That's hearsay.
His financial problem was when he sold some of the same whiskey to both Buchanan and Sons and Gregory and Stagg.
And I guess they didn't want to share.
Right. It was one of those situations at the end of the 1870s. There was a financial run on the banks. There was a lot of political uncertainty because Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president, but his Democratic opponent actually won more votes. The election was thrown into Congress, where the Republican-controlled Congress obviously controlled the election. But
what year are we in right now?
we're talking
1870s.
Yeah, we're like late 1800s, leading into the Civil War, or just
after the Civil War. Because
okay.
that was one of the big problems, is that people thought the Civil War was going to break out again because the Democrat was the candidate of the South. I think it was the election of 1876.
E.H. Taylor just had some really bad timing on a lot of his business.
Right, and there was an overproduction of whiskey at that same time and everything else. So you had a lot of financial things that added up to where he got into financial trouble so much that he actually considered running away to Peru.
So how do you know you wanted to go to Peru? Like, was it in his diary? Like, how do you know?
Because of his personal papers. He had letters from the he was friends with the ambassador from the United States with Peru, and
he's like, I'm coming down.
He was
like, hey, you still have that guest room down there.
And he was like, well, how much would it cost me to come down there and get started over?
Let's make some E.H. Taylor cigars in Peru.
So there you go.
Okay, so we're there at that point in history. So how does it lead up into being Buffalo Trace or being George T. Stagg Distillery?
Well, George T. Stagg, of course, like I said, Gregory and Stagg bailed him out. Stagg came to Kentucky and took over the business.
And it was
took over the distillery. You know, the Gregory and Stagg are actually originally from St. Louis. And Stagg came to Kentucky and started running the distillery. Taylor had a fallout with them, mostly with Gregory more than Stagg, but he wasn't happy with either one of them because they both believed in quantity over quality. And he moves to a small distillery that he had bought years before, and his son Jacob Swigert Taylor had been running, and he built that up into the old Taylor distillery. Stagg ran the distillery until his death. Prohibition comes along. The distillery quits distilling during Prohibition because everybody had to until 1928.
Did they have one of the medicinal
But
licenses,
they did.
though?
Well, Shinley had one of the medicinal licenses, and
Okay.
they were buying their whiskey from
Okay.
Stagg. Shinley actually buys the distillery just before Prohibition comes to an end. They own it all the way up until a bunch of Shinley executives get together and decide that they want to buy the distillery and go independent in 1984. And they do that, and it was actually the Ancient Age Distillery by that time. And they ran it as Age International up until Sazerac gained control of it and turned it into Buffalo Trace in the late 90s.
Interesting. So you might be new to this, but we're going to ask you all the dumb questions so you can give us all the very smart answers. Right? So, at this point, I think it's we're getting some good information. So, I mean, what else have you got? What else, Nino? You've been here for 3 days now?
Yes.
So, what have you seen so far that has uniquely intrigued you about Louisville or Kentucky or just bourbon in general?
The Bourbon Salon at Oxmoor.
Yes. Being at Buffalo Trace today, I got to witness a rare event: the bottling of Van Winkle whiskey. It was rye whiskey, though.
Right.
So they were bottling, I guess, what will be a summer release. That's not official confirmation. I'm just guessing, depending upon.
It usually comes out right before Father's Day.
Wait, for the Van Winkle rye? What? You're not talking about like during the 13-year, like this is when everything comes out in the fall kind of rye?
I mean, they were bottling it now. My assumption would be they're not going to sit on those bottles for the next couple months.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Yeah,
You'd be
that's
surprised.
possible.
Possibly, yeah.
It's going to sit at distributors.
That's what led to the theft.
Yeah.
Sat on it too long.
Interestingly, they had a supervisor there watching the bottling going on.
You mean they don't trust those people anymore?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think one of the cool things about at least the Van Winkle line, because I've actually seen it there. I was there actually when they were bottling Pappy 20 at one point. It was just... I mean,
I've always wondered what that bulge in your jacket was that day when you left.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? Yeah. Keep it quiet. But I mean, I think it's really cool to actually kind of see because in this day and age when everything is so machine driven, everything's so automation driven, because we've actually had an opportunity to go and visit Heaven Hill and we've seen their operation. We understand and what it knows to look at.
It's like a Ford factory.
Oh, I mean, even there and Maker's Mark, that really the only thing that people do by hand there is dip in the wax, right? So I think it's really neat
Blanton House really
to kind of
is
see
really
what happens,
Right.
at least in regards to because it's just one of those brands. It is what it is, but the fact that those are one of the things that everything's still like hand done in regards to labeling, that it seems it's still very organic in nature.
When I was at Buffalo Trace, besides they had 2 bottling lines going in their small hand guided warehouse. So one was the Van Winkle rye, and the other was a Blanton's export for Japan. And
The black.
I actually think it might have been the green.
Oh, the special reserve. Okay.
Yeah. And they, had folks on both lines filling bottles, putting labels on, putting it in boxes. It was all hands-on, about as old school as you're going to get. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not talking large-scale production there because, you walk a few buildings over and there's Buffalo Trace's more automated system. But,
Just cranking them
to
out.
be on the grounds of a distillery where both happen, Buffalo Trace has such a long history to begin with, is pretty fascinating watching that sort of duality happening on one campus.
That's like it. Yeah, when we went to Heaven Hill, they had the huge factory line, and then they're like, and here's the card table where we hand bottle like Henry McKenna and everyone's single barrel, and the Parkers. It's like 10 by 12 table.
I have to say something about this old school.
Of course you do.
The real old school, which I wouldn't be surprised at all if we don't see some of the craft distillers doing it this way. Photographs of the women bottling the whiskey from the early 1900s, to where they have a copper funnel that they fill the funnel that it holds 1 quart, and then they push the button on the funnel and it leases it into the bottle.
Wow.
Literally 1 bottle at a time.
Wow. That would be something.
That's old school.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, speaking of old school meeting new school, I do want to give a shout out to Castle and Key. I've been there this
absolutely.
week, and
So I guess a good question to kind of throw at you all for that is, everybody's very excited for this, right? Everybody's very excited.
Absolutely.
Sure. The anticipation.
It's we all love it, the fact that we're reviving an old landmark.
Right.
We understand that they're going to be driving what's called the Bourbon Drinkers Gin as one of their first kind of
right
forays
And in fact,
into it. But
they have botanicals planted for that already on the foundation of an old
The
warehouse that
original
got torn
warehouse,
down.
The first warehouse.
there you go.
Yeah.
But what else makes you like so excited for this, right? Is it just
Is it
because
Marianne Barnes or
is it just Marianne?
So,
Marianne?
I think what you're looking at here, I come from a background that's tech in orientation, so I've really seen how startups evolve. And, we pay a lot of attention at the Whiskey Wash to the craft scene. And definitely what they're doing there is a craft style operation. But whereas a lot of craft these days, we're coming out of a garage or we're working in a little tiny renovated shoe factory or something like that, what these guys are doing is sort of the ultimate distillery startup, where they are renovating
Right.
an old historic distillery, one building at a time, in some cases literally having to put glass windows back into the frames of that they fell out of, and try to make it into something that not only will be a distillery making whiskey, but also something that is a tourist destination.
Well, even more importantly, they have to clean up generations of mess before them.
40 years.
Yeah,
plus,
yeah, 40 years plus of people who back in the 1930s didn't realize that asbestos was a bad thing because it was
Right.
starting, it kept people from catching fire.
Right.
They have a lot of that to deal with. But what they have done, the landscaping alone, bringing the landscaping back to E.H. Taylor's dream and vision is fantastic.
When you think about it, to you, Mr. Veach, when you think is really is landscaping the most thing that gets you excited? What's the most thing that really gets you excited about bringing Old Taylor back to its original glory?
For me, actually, it does have a lot to do with the landscaping and everything, bringing it back to its original showplace site.
And
Because I am,
Right.
everybody is creating great distilleries nowadays. Peerless has a great distillery.
right.
And I am quite sure they're going to put a great distillery back in there at the Old Taylor. But the fact that they're paying attention to the detail and bringing, even the landscape, the John Karlofskas.
It is really a big thing. I saw pictures today. I was out there talking to their brand ambassador, Brett Connor, and he showed me a picture of the Sunken Gardens. And then that warehouse that is next to the Sunken Gardens used to be a raised garden. So there was Sunken Gardens next to raised gardens right next to the castle. There were a lot of gardens out there in Taylor's time.
And there are frogs in the pools there.
I saw frogs. I saw frogs today.
The thing that is Castle and Key is that they're combining the history of bourbon in a place like that.
Actually, I want to correct you here. It's not just the history; it's the heritage.
The heritage,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
And the new age with Marianne.
You're truly seeing a melding of the new and the old, which is, in a land where bourbon moves slow as history evolves, you're seeing a new generation of distillers like Marianne Barnes, and we're preparing an article on what they're doing, the latest chapter of it. And, this is a young and scrappy team. They're not just throwing out the baby with the bathwater, being like, oh, we're just going to gut this place and turn it into the Disneyland of distilleries.
Right.
They're really trying to carefully pay attention to the heritage that this place holds and to recognize themselves as the next chapter in keeping this place's history alive.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is, as you're telling this story, Brett said something to me earlier when we were out there today, and I don't know whether this is okay to say. I'm sorry, Brett, if it's not, but he said, the hipsters are really making this possible. They're really making this comeback possible because, they're saving all these elements of the design, the original dials from the boilers and the original, control panels, and so much of what they're using is repurposed original stuff. It's exactly. And I just thought it was so funny. He's like, the hipsters are totally making this possible.
Now, that being said, Castle and Key for a while in the old Forester days literally sat with nothing but pretty much a chain fence keeping people out. So if you're one of those
Doing
folks
a very
that
poor job.
maybe, quote, borrowed something from
I have
there?
to make a correction. It wasn't Old Forester. It was National Distillers.
National Distillery, okay.
Even better.
If you're one of those
Here
folks
comes Veach with the
history bombs.
There you go. Wait a minute.
If you're one of those folks that borrowed something
Facts are
from
optional
them,
here,
please return. Thank you.
You know what? And if you want to give that to me, and I will take that, and I will not disclose your name, and I will just take that and return them to them.
So I have to tell you my first experience with Castle and Key, or Will Arvin and the owners there. He had actually contacted me and wanted me to come out and visit, but I'd never had a chance. Well, Janet Patton out at the Lexington Herald Leader called me one day, and she says, I've got an appointment to go out to the Old Taylor Distillery. Would you like to come out with me? And I said, well, I've been trying to get out there for a time, but we could never work out a date. I'd be happy to do so. So I show up there, and Janet had told Will and the crew there that I was coming and everything. So I show up there, and he has a cameraman there.
Oh dear.
Well, yeah, of course. That's when we heard we were going to come to dinner night with Mike Veach. We're like, we better bring our equipment.
So
Veach just thought we were drinking. And
So he was like,
tonight.
I hope you don't mind, but I want to film you as you go through here and talk about this place at E.H. Taylor so I can show it to everybody that starts working here so they can understand the relationship. And I'm like,
Genius.
And I'm like, sure, if that's what you want to do. So I spent like the next hour and a half walking through the distillery, and every word I said was being recorded. It was just like...
As you do.
Okay, so we're reaching the top. We're at 31 minutes right now, but I want to pose one last question, and maybe it's not even a question. It's more or less a thought or a pondering. So in the past few weeks, there was a huge... I guess you could say there was going to be a crowdfunding campaign that was going to be going on by Jim Rutledge, and it fell short. It fell short because a few different things. There was communication errors, a few different snafus, and so I kind of want to get your all's kind of takes or opinions on that. Like, what do you all think of the Jim Rutledge Distillery and what's going to happen to it? Because at this point, I've heard a lot of people say, I mean, don't get me wrong, like Jim Rutledge, he's an icon in the industry, but if he's going to start a new distillery, like, how long is it going to be till he has his first drop of real whiskey, and will he actually be around to be able to even see that day?
I have a lot to say on this subject, actually. You know, I talked to Jim.
I need more whiskey, please.
Another round.
So, you know, I want to start off by saying I think that the criticisms of the crowdfunding efforts were maybe a little unfounded because, you know, my knee-jerk reaction to that was we don't want to have another Chip Tate situation. If we had Jim Rutledge in a Chip Tate situation, that would be, you know, very sad for a lot of people who love whiskey and love the whiskey business. You know, I would hate to see Jim Rutledge getting into a situation where he is at the mercy of all of his investors and ends up getting booted out of his own distillery. I think that would be a travesty of the whiskey industry. So, you know, I think maybe what happened there was it was maybe not as well thought out as it could have been. And I think if they would have, you know, put a little bit more thought into the rollout effort and especially the marketing of the crowdfunding efforts, it would have been a little bit more successful. And that would have given them the opportunity to start off without being so investor heavy on the front end. Because, you know, when you have investors, they want a return on that investment.
As soon as possible.
You know, exactly, as
And
soon
in
as possible.
bourbon,
And that
there's
doesn't
no-
happen.
Right.
The bourbon industry is very
I
capital
agree
intensive.
with everything Maggie says. Bourbon is a long-term investment. That's one of the big problems with the bourbon industry through the 1990s.
Keeps all the riffraff out.
It became, you know, a publicly traded business for the most part, and stockholders want their money now, not
Right.
6 years later. My biggest problem with Jim's efforts, and you know, I wished him great success, but I wasn't willing to invest in it myself, simply because he never came out with a successor.
Yeah.
He is old enough. He is old enough now that I wanted to say, okay, I'm going to start this, and this is somebody I really trust and think will do everything right, just like I want to do it. This is who's going to carry it on by the time, you know, 10 years from now, when the business is going strong and I'm no longer able to carry on because I'm in my late 80s.
Yeah.
I think what's happened with Rutledge's distillery around crowdfunding is difficult because from the tech sector perspective, when you look at how crowdfunding campaigns are played out, there's an expectation people have when they invest in it that they're going to get something. There is a certain amount of altruism where people will be like,
Not a
yeah,
coin, not a brick.
Right.
Right.
People really are like, yeah, I'll support it because I love the project. You will always have a certain percentage of people that do that. But the challenge is in today's crowdfunding world, like I said, people want something for what they put in. And when you look at what was available at the different reward levels, and I think Rutledge's team realized that after the fact when they got the criticism, etc., it wasn't what people were expecting they would get out of a distillery. There's an expectation, I think, when people invest in a distillery, that they're going to get whiskey. Right. Now, there are a lot of legal challenges around that, which have proven to be difficult for other distilleries going the crowdfunding route. I understand Rutledge's desire to go this way because you definitely see him wanting to build support for his product, for his distillery. Now, the flip side to this, according to what Rutledge had said, is that the campaign did help him attract some outside investors. Now, we don't know who they are or how much that is, whether it'll be enough to carry through his project.
Mark
Shark
Cuban,
Tank.
yeah.
To fruition. Yes, Rutledge will be on Shark Tank next Friday.
Chris
But,
Sacco.
you know, as far as the long-term prognosis for his distillery, even if it does get off the ground, it's hard to say. Will he be around when his first bourbon comes out? I don't know. I hope so. He's definitely one of the legends of the industry. But it is a challenge to start a distillery as you get up there.
Absolutely.
Right, don't get me wrong. I wish Jim a very long and healthy life, but you know he is of an age now that you have to wonder: is he going to be around 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
But I think also I'll say just that, you know, Rutledge is one of a number of true master distillers that have either retired in the last year or been forced out, as there's been a changing of the guard at some of these distilleries. You look at things like Barton's, or look at MGP with Greg Metz's sudden departure last week. I think these are guys that will, for the remainder of their days, do what they can to be still tied to the distillery industry because it's in their blood. It's all they know.
That's what they've done.
They've
all
been
day,
doing
every
it.
day.
They're from a generation where I got in the distillery at age 18, starting in the bottling room.
Right.
And now at 82, I'm the retiring master distiller. I don't know what else to do now, so let me go back to this because it's what I love.
Right. So I'll kind of close it out and can kind of give my last thoughts on it. I think he made a very, very bold move in trying to say, like, oh, we're going to try to raise almost $2 million through crowdfunding, right? Like, I think when you look at anything that's on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or anything like that, to raise $2 million is absolutely absurd. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? Like, 500,000, couple hundred thousand, it's doable, right? Because and as Nito kind of hinted at earlier, like, you have to. There's just something that people want back in return for their money. They want to be able to get something and be like, yeah, I invested in this and I want an early product of it, right? That's kind of the thing. Like, I want the POCs. I want a chance to go and sample the barrels when they're there. All that sort of thing, right? And I think that might have been what they're missing. But as we all said, we all have a great, deep respect for Jim, and we all hope the best in whatever this is to come. And we'll kind of have to just kind of see what's going to happen here in the next few years and how it's all going to kind of play out. So with that, let's go ahead and we'll close out the show. So thank you again, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Nino. And thank you, Mr. Michael Veach, for finally being on the podcast for the first time ever. Hopefully, we're going to get you on again. I'm going to hold you to it.
You'll stop getting emails from Kenny harassing you.
Can we get the check, please? Thanks.
Thanks to Whiskey Wash for our fine dinner.
Yes. So if you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe to us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on iTunes, but also make sure you like us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, all those great social media channels. Also subscribe to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit.
We're crowdfunding. We need your cash. And we'll give you something instantly. We'll give you stickers and koozies. You don't have to wait 6 years for that.
And we're not raising $2 million.
That's right. No, if you have any show suggestions, feedback, comments, we greatly appreciate it. And appreciate you guys coming out and having us here for dinner. It was a great time.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll see you next time.